always talk about hyper growth and scaling, etc. But these are important metrics for sure. But when you think about your employees, particularly as a company starts to scale and there's hundreds, maybe thousands of employees, your employees don't get out of bed because of your market capitalization or your profits. Right? You say you're going to go from $100 million of profit to 200 million. Okay, that doesn't speak to me. If I explain what I do to my kids and I tell them, my purpose in life is to grow profits from 100 million to 200 million, they're going to look at me with round eyes and say, Daddy, what is it that you're really doing? And why should I be proud of you? And so there needs to be something else. There needs to be a purpose that could be really anything. It could be serving communities. It could be delivering something to our customers that no one delivers because we understand them better. And I think we can all relate to companies that we love because we love their products, whether it's technology products, a search engine, a favorite airline. In Singapore, we're blessed with one of the best airlines in the world. And really, if they didn't exist, I would miss them. So that is a purpose, right? And you ask yourself, if my company didn't exist, who would miss me? And if you're just in the business of making money, you're just in the business of scaling, you're just in the business of increasing your market share, that is not sufficient to say, yes, absolutely, there will be people who miss you if you don't exist.
Hi, and thanks for being part of this community of resilient entrepreneurs. Today's conversation is with a thought leader who specializes in bringing together Eastern spiritual traditions with Western management. We're talking to Fabrice Desmarescaux. Fabrice's book is The Art of Retreats, and he draws on his experience as a McKinsey partner, his public speaking, and his life experiences. And just last week, Fabrice turned 60. And I don't think he'll mind us saying that because it's on his LinkedIn page. And his post was about how each decade of life brought something new and better. And we're really looking forward to talking about that journey today and how Fabrice now contributes with his conscious leadership approach. You're listening to Resilient Entrepreneurs, the podcast where we speak with business owners from all around the world and from all walks of life in the hope that something you hear today will leave your business a little richer. Our business is 2-for-1 branding, and we support new entrepreneurs as you launch your business. We offer you the tools you need to succeed, which is exactly why we invite experienced, successful entrepreneurs like Fabrice to share their wisdom with you on this podcast. And we'd love to ask just one small thing of you, a small thing that has a big impact. So if you love Resilient Entrepreneurs podcast and you find it helpful, please subscribe to the show on the platform you're listening or watching on now. It will really help us get this on the playlists of so many more people. And the bonus for you is that you'll be notified of the next great episode and you'll know that you shared the love today. And strengthening someone to be a resilient entrepreneur. Enough of that. Fabrice, welcome. It is wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you. Very happy to be here, Vicky, and hi, Laura.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. I understand you just had a birthday, turned 60, which makes you a year of the dragon, which makes us fellow dragons, because I'm born in 76, which is also a year of dragon.
Dragon is a very good sign.
Yes, it is. So it's going to be a good year for us. A very lucky year for us, I hope. So tell us a little bit about your childhood, Fabrice. Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Paris mostly. So I'm French. You can hear that from my accent. I grew up in Paris and left the country right after graduation. So I've actually almost never worked in France. And when I go back to France, I feel more like a tourist than as a native. I speak the language fluently, but the country has changed a lot and since I left. And so it's interesting to go back to my roots and discover how being a tourist in your own country. It's very, very interesting.
So where did you head after then? Was it university you did through in France?
Yeah, so I studied in France and engineer, as many French people, and left after graduation. So I was 24 when I left, moved to Spain. I spent and so worked in London, worked in Germany, and finally moved to Asia, where I settled down for good about 27 years ago. So in effect, I've spent most of my adult life in Asia. And that's what I call home today, Singapore. Singapore is home.
Hmm. A Frenchman in Singapore. What a beautiful combination.
Well, it sounds so different, but in fact, there are so many similarities between Europe and Asia that I find it easy for a European as a French person to feel at home in Asia. There's an appreciation for the good things in life. There's an appreciation for food in particular, that most Asian countries are very proud of their culinary traditions, and so are the French, and a few other things. So it's actually not that difficult to feel at home in Asia.
Such an interesting comparison, and one that I wouldn't have considered before this conversation. So thank you for that. Listen, we talked briefly, we touched on the LinkedIn post from last week. So let's share with our audience just a touch of that. It was a beautiful reflection, it seemed, of your 60 years on the planet, and talking about how your 20s you were figuring out what to do in life. In your 30s it was all about achieving. In your 40s you say your ego started melting just a tiny bit, and then in your 50s you made choices out of conviction and passion. So enlighten us a little on that life journey and where you are today.
Well, 60 is a big milestone, and I'm reflective in general, and maybe a little bit more when I approach a big birthday or at certain key points in the year. Like, for example, I always find that the end of the year, Christmas, New Year, is a wonderful time to take stock, to reflect. You know, what's taking stock of the past, what hopes do we have for the future, what would we like to achieve. And so I find these milestones very good opportunities to reflect. And as I was turning 60, I thought, okay, what sticks out? And I came up with this hope, really, this message of hope for the future, that I realized every decade has been better than the previous one. So if you ask me the question, would I want to go back and be 20 again? The answer is absolutely not. Now, I wouldn't mind having my 20-year-old body, but I certainly don't want to let go of my 60-year-old experience and wisdom, with all the scars and the mistakes I've made along the way, because I think that has really enormously contributed to my appreciation of life today. And I don't think I really appreciated life in my 20s or my 30s. I was really trying to figure out what to do with my life, where to do it, how to make money, how to be successful. And I think when I speak to younger people, everyone can relate to that. The first half of life is really about figuring things out and hopefully making all the mistakes, so that the second half can be more enjoyable. So that was my takeaway from these 6 decades on Earth, and really a message of optimism for myself, and I guess it resonated with a lot of the readers of the post, that they could say, yes, I can connect with that.
Yeah, definitely. Tell us, what do you do? How do you help people today?
How do I help people? Well, I guess we would need to ask them. But joke aside, I work with leadership teams of mostly large corporations. Occasionally, we work with younger companies, including startups, but typically they are well-established startups, so approaching unicorn status in general. And I work with the leadership team, so I coach the team to work better together. The analogy that I take very often is, how do you take an executive suite, CEO plus direct reports, and get them to work as tightly and fluidly as say one of the best football teams, for example. If you're interested in football, but you see 11 players on the field, and when it works well, some of the best teams, 11 people are almost sharing a unique consciousness. They know where the others are without having to look around. Instinctively, they move together. And at the end of the game, there's only one score that matters, which is, did we win or did we lose? It's not like the striker could say, well, I won the game because I got the ball and I did this and I did that, and the goalie say, you lost the game. No, we all win together or we all lose together. And that's an analogy that I use with leadership teams to say, instead of working in silos and everyone minds their own little piece of the territory and the CEO is the only person connecting the dots, and everyone is pursuing their individual incentives with their own KPIs, their own measures of success. And so you could have someone winning and someone losing while being on the same team. I say, how do we create this collective consciousness where we all win together or we all lose together, and hopefully we win more than we lose. It sounds very easy to describe like this, but in fact, it's a major shift in consciousness for a lot of leadership teams that are organized in a more traditional way, hierarchical, where the CEO knows best and then directs the people. So that's the bulk of what I do. I also spend a lot of time, and that's one of my passions, to develop the next generation of leaders. So I work with slightly younger executives who are maybe one level below the C-suite, and help them to accelerate their development so that they can move up and become senior executives and potentially CEOs. And hopefully, part of what I do is also giving them a conviction that performance and purpose have to go hand in hand. It's not an either or proposition. You can make money at the same time serving the world and being a force for good in the world. And I think that applies also to a lot of startups. I've seen a lot of people going into the startup world thinking, I want to make it big. I want to become a billionaire. I want to become a unicorn, but occasionally losing track of a greater purpose. And I find that ultimately, this may be satisfying for a while, but ultimately we need to combine performance with purpose, and purpose of good, not a purpose of evil, a purpose of good for the world. And so when I work with younger leaders, that's really the conviction that I try to build in them, that they can be a force for good in the world, and God knows we need it. And then I do one-on-one coaching of mostly CEOs who need a safe place to reflect. I think I worked with a lot of CEOs of large corporations, and it's a very lonely place. It's hard to go to your board, your chairman, and share your hopes and your fears and your questions. It's difficult to go to your subordinates. Not everyone has at home a partner who can also understand what they do. And so as an executive coach, I provide a safe place to really reflect on what is going on, and the good, the bad, the ugly, and hopefully help leaders find a way forward. So that's me.
That's amazing. 3 full-time positions there, I would suggest. 3 full-time businesses by the sound of it. And all built on a really solid philosophy of helping yourself while you help others. Would that be an accurate reflection?
Correct. Yes, yes. And look, the simplest way I explain that with clients is say, look, you're all focused on your market share, your market capitalization, profits, EBITDA, revenue. I mean, you name it, right? These metrics are interesting in the sense that they allow you to survive, right? A company that doesn't make money ultimately will die. And so a company needs to be successful. A company needs to make profit, and a company needs to grow. Although we can argue to what extent growth is really a desirable metrics, but I don't want to go into that philosophical consideration now. We can come back to that later because it's very relevant for early stage startups. And, we always talk about hyper growth and scaling, etc. But these are important metrics for sure. But when you think about your employees, particularly as a company starts to scale and there's hundreds, maybe thousands of employees, your employees don't get out of bed because of your market capitalization or your profit. Right? You say, we're going to go from $100 million of profit to 200 million. Okay, that doesn't speak to me. If I explain what I do to my kids and I tell them, my purpose in life is to grow profits from 100 million to 200 million, they're going to look at me with round eyes and say, Daddy, what is it that you're really doing? And why should I be proud of you? And so there needs to be something else. There needs to be a purpose that could be really anything. It could be serving communities. It could be delivering something to our customers that no one delivers because we understand them better. And I think we can all relate to companies that we love because we love their products, whether it's technology products, a search engine, a favorite airline. In Singapore, we're blessed with one of the best airlines in the world. And really, if they didn't exist, I would miss them. So that is a purpose, right? And you ask yourself, if my company didn't exist, who would miss me? And if you're just in the business of making money, you're just in the business of scaling, you're just in the business of increasing your market share, that is not sufficient to say, yes, absolutely, there will be people who miss you if you don't exist. If I may take a quick parenthesis, that is what prompted my many midlife crises. But on the professional front, I was a banker after I left McKinsey the first time and before returning to McKinsey to take care of our leadership practice. I was a banker. I grew up to be a banker. I was a leader in McKinsey's financial services practice when I was young. And when I left McKinsey more than 20 years ago, I joined a bank and I became head of consumer banking for that bank. So from an external standpoint, I had all the perks, all the prestige, the power that you want. I was running hundreds of branches, thousands of employees, etc. And so a lot of people looking at me would say, wow, look at this guy. He's barely 40 years old. He's made it. And I was really miserable. And there was nothing wrong with my colleagues or my bank or my shareholders. I mean, the problem was not outside. The problem was really inside me. And I was wondering every day, if my bank disappeared, who would miss us really? And we were manufacturing the same credit cards as anybody else, the same deposit accounts as anybody else, the same mortgage as anybody else, producing the same advertising on TV as everybody else, people shaking hands, a happy family because they got their mortgage, but everybody does the same stuff. And I was like, would anyone miss this bank? If a giant alien spaceship came and sucked the bank out of the earth and it disappears forever, would anyone notice? I couldn't convince myself that the answer was yes. I think the answer was no, because there were dozens of banks doing the same stuff. And that really prompted an existential crisis. Do I want to spend my life doing something like that? And again, that was really a personal thing. It's not a reflection on the bank or whatever. The bank is still around today and doing well, but it was purely, I want to feel that I'm doing something that has meaning for others. And that created my first breakthrough. A tough one, if you ask me, because when you realize that everything you've worked for in your life is actually not what you really want to do, it's a difficult time. And I was 40 years old at the time, so it's not like I could stop working and just drink daiquiris on the beach, right? I really need to figure out what am I going to do with my life, and that really prompted a deep soul searching and the discovery that actually I'm much better off if I support leaders, I support executives. That will be useful for them. I will really help them with their careers, and I will feel good about it, and that creates fulfillment on a daily basis. So that's my short story.
Oh, I love it. And it's so deep. And I love how your personal experience leads you to exactly where you are today and supporting people who are potentially verging on their own existential midlife crisis. So you're either there to catch them or to guide them through it.
Yeah. The more I work with our clients, the more I'm convinced that you cannot separate profit from or performance, whichever way you define performance, from a purpose, a sense of contributing to something that is greater than us, right? It's not about filling our pockets with cash.
So, Fabrice, what was the answer? How did you get from the feeling like contribution was required and you were feeling a bit soulless in that job to understanding what your purpose really is?
Like everything in life, and I've worked with a lot of executives to help them figure out what is their answer, serendipity plays an enormous role. Carl Jung would call it synchronicity. In a way, it's things lining up without you having to do anything, lining up for a good reason. And the only thing that is required is for you to pay attention. If you can distinguish the signal from the noise, if you can hear the faint whispers of your heart and your soul, it's not going to happen overnight. You're going to start seeing a pattern that emerges. And of course, the universe will show you the way. So in my case, very simply, I was really coming to terms with the fact that I was not meant to be a banker. I was not particularly good at it, if you ask me, and certainly not finding fulfillment in it. But I didn't have the answer of what is it that I'm good at. And coming out of the financial services world and the consulting world, it's not like I had particularly useful life skills. cannot drive a truck. I cannot fix the plumbing in a house. I cannot practice CPR. I don't have anything useful that I can do with my hands. I was just a brain on a stick. A friend of mine called me. She's a very well-known headhunter in Singapore, very, very respected. And she calls me and she says, "Hey, Fabrice, how are you doing? And would you consider joining that bank?" So basically a job offer proposition to look at leaving my bank and going to work for another bank. And I said, "Karen, thank you very much, but I think I'm done with working with banks. This is not me." And she went like, "Oh, okay. Why don't you join us instead?" And that's how I took a year for everything to fall in place. But essentially, that's how I became a headhunter. Complete serendipity. I didn't know what headhunting was. I had been in touch with executive search consultants, of course, but I had no idea what they did really. So I spent time understanding what that meant. And I came to the conclusion that yes, I would really enjoy that. I could potentially be good at it. And then looking backward, I realized, oh, but I've always been interested in developing others. I was always part of the recruiting trips at McKinsey. I was part of the faculty that trains our young consultants. I was really impressed when I worked with an executive coach. McKinsey helps their partners with executive coaching. And I thought my coach, Stuart, was absolutely fantastic. And I said, when I grow up, I want to be like Stuart, the kind of guy who wears comfortable shirts and walks barefoot, right? And I said, yes, of course it makes sense. Now, looking with hindsight, looking at all the patterns, and that's what I call listening to the whispers of your soul. All the signs are there, the little breadcrumbs are there all along. You just need to make sense of it. And for that, you need to pay attention. If you're constantly working 24/7, pushing, then you may feel that something is not comfortable, but you're not taking the time to look at the patterns of your life, to look at what are the breadcrumbs that you've left all along that maybe point towards your purpose or towards something that really gives you meaning. And so that's what I did. I had a little bit of time to reflect, and I thought, you know what? I've always been interested in developing people. I've always been interested in recruiting. I enjoy working as an advisor to senior executives. I have pretty good networks in Asia, particularly in the financial services sector. Why don't I give this a go? And the rest is history, right? I found my calling. You don't need to find exactly what's something that works 100%. There were a few adjustments along the way. Over time, I did less recruiting and more coaching, etc. It's just by spending time and really looking for the patterns of our life that we can figure out what gives us a sense of fulfillment.
Yeah. And you raise a great point, is that when we're go, 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 particularly at the executive level, but in particular also is an entrepreneur, someone starting a new business, it's go, go, go. It's always on, working in the business, catering to clients and building and networking and all the busy work. And it's very easy to say, well, we need to listen to the whisper of our soul. And I love the way you say that. Yet some listeners might have a big fat question. When? How do I do that? So I'm curious, is your book perhaps one of the solutions? Is it something about taking time to a retreat?
Well, it's always about taking time. The question that you ask, I guess, is how do you find the time? That's the first question, because I get this objection from everyone when I say you should think about taking a retreat. At this point where you are, given the issues that you're facing, I think it is urgent to slow down and take a step back. And the question I get is, well, how can I take a step back when I'm deep into the weeds and fixing problems all day long and trying to keep things together? I barely have time to do everything I need to do every day. How do you want me to take off for 3 weeks and go into a monastery in the mountains? Or the first realization is that we don't need to take 3 weeks and retire to a monastery. We don't need to shave our head. We don't need to wear robes to find some measure of enlightenment. The slowing down could be slowing down for a very short period of time. It could be for 1 hour, for 2 hours. But the act of slowing down, which means, and in my book, I talk about the 4 S's of retreat. Number one, solitude. So you have to be taking some time alone. You cannot be constantly surrounded by people and interacting with people. There is a time, even for the extroverts, I think there is a time for being on our own. The second one is silence. And again, it's not about going into a soundproof chamber. It's about disconnecting the devices and all the noise and all the interruptions that constantly bombard us. The third one is do this in a space, and that's my third S, the space. Do that in a space that brings you a sense of joy, a sense of peace, serenity. And we all have that. It could be a room in our house, it could be a garden, it could be a bench in the park, it could be a walk on the beach. We all have a space that deeply resonates with us. And the last one is the connection with the spirit, this willingness to listen to the whispers of the soul. So if you combine these four S's of silence, solitude, space, and spirit, you don't need 3 weeks. Take an hour, bring a notebook, a blank sheet of paper, a nice pen. Please don't use a tablet because you're going to be tempted to start browsing or watch YouTube or something. Really leave the electronics outside of the room. Just go back to analog, a nice notebook, a nice pen. Spend an hour like that. And start jotting down whatever is on your mind, just offloading, for example. Or what are your hopes? What are your fears? And things will start. It's very hard to describe because there's no process that says you do A, B, C, D, and you will obtain E, F, G, H. It's not prescriptive. It's emerging. So you have to have faith in a way that the time you're going to spend stepping back, which can be excruciatingly difficult to find because you're so busy, but the time that you will spend in these short moments of retreat will be actually extremely productive. So that's the articulation of the concept of retreats and why retreats can be so powerful. Now, I have a long list of executives whom I've taken on with me on retreats and or who have gone on their own and come back and say this was fantastic and I want to do it again. But it takes a little bit of faith, I guess, for someone, particularly in the startup stage, when you start building a business and even if you had 48 hours in the day, you could still not get to the end of your to-do list. It takes a little bit of a leap of faith. But the only thing I can say is try it. Try it for an hour, try it for a couple of hours and see what you get out of it. And if it doesn't work for you, so be it. Maybe it's not the right time.
That does sound amazing. Where is some of your favorite places to take people on retreats?
Well, in Asia, we're blessed with a number of beautiful sites and some highly spiritual sites. So, just to name a few, the site of Borobudur in central Java, so that's in Indonesia, about an hour drive away from the city of Yogyakarta. That is a beautiful, beautiful place. It's a place that is very rich in history, Hindu kingdoms, Buddhist kingdoms. The monument of Borobudur itself is the oldest Buddhist monument from I think it's the 8th century that is preserved, and it's amazing. There's so much history and spirituality. You're surrounded by volcanoes, and it's really, really hard when you start meditating at 5:45 in the morning, which is usually when day breaks. It's almost impossible not to be in awe and really to have your soul open up. So that's one place. Ubud in Bali, also in Indonesia, is a very spiritual place. And then there's beautiful beach resorts where we can go and take walks on the beach and look at the sunset. And all these, this use of nature is really to bring back the executive mind that is so focused on performance and deliverables and objectives and milestones, etc. Reconnect us with a sense that there's really something greater than us. And at the end of the day, all our little problems, am I going to hit the 100 million mark this year? Am I going to deliver this project? Yeah. Yes, it's important. I know it's important, but it's not that important. You know what? In 10 years from now, you won't even remember or all the angst that you had about delivering your milestone. It just doesn't matter. look at the sunset, look at your place in the universe, and how can you communicate and communicate with this universe, and feel that you're part of it, and all the other human beings that are with you on this retreat are also part of it, and that at the end of the day we all share the same consciousness with the other human beings, with the animals, with the trees, and with the volcanoes, with the sea, with the ocean, etc. And isn't it what matters really? So nature is very important. I think we've lost a little bit our connection to nature. We live in cities where there's light 24 hours of the day. We've lost our connection to the day and the cycles, the natural cycles of nature. We've lost a little bit that connection. But ultimately, this is really part of the fabric of who we are as human beings. We were built like that millions of years ago. And reconnecting with who we truly are as human beings is really a very good way, I find, for leaders to take that step back and say, you know what, there's things that matter and there's things that don't matter so much. And so I'm going to use a well-known book. I'm going to stop sweating the small stuff, and I'm really going to look at the big picture. How can I be useful to my colleagues? How can I be useful to my clients? How can I be useful to my communities? How can I create something that really has a purpose? How do I find fulfillment in doing all this? Right. So that's how I think going on retreats in beautiful places like that helps you do.
And they're all such important questions for whatever we're doing in business to be sustainable. If we're not asking ourselves those questions, and I think they're uncommon questions in business still, although we're seeing more and more of it, the consciousness coming into business, which I'm really excited about. Only 10 years ago, business was business, and you didn't even use that word love in anything, including advertising. It was radical to say anything about you'll love it. Whereas now you see it everywhere. So I'm starting to see that mainstream human connection, the feelings, the emotions come into business a little bit. But those questions you pose are key to not only it being sustainable for the business, but also for each individual in it. And I love that you focus on the connection, human to human connection. And now, earlier on, you talked when Laura asked you, how is it you help people? And your first description was in the corporate space. And the way you described it brought to me an image of a flock of birds just all moving as one. So I'm curious, out of that, is there a lesson? You're working in that high executive space, but is there something that's transferable for someone who's starting their business or even thinking of starting their business? What can they bring from that philosophy, that ideology, into their business from the get-go?
I think there's a couple of things. The dynamics of a young business are very different from the dynamics of a well-established large corporation. So we need to keep that in mind. I also started a business when I turned 50. I started a leadership and executive search firm with a couple of partners, and we left our big cushy corporate job, and suddenly we had to figure out how to make a photocopy ourselves and negotiate a cheap lease because we wanted to make sure we would have enough cash to pay our employees at the end of the month. And there were a few nights when I woke up and thinking, how is this going to work? And will we be able to make payroll at the end of the month, etc. So I understand the difference between, these are all problems that you don't have when you work in a large corporation. So I think that the first application for young companies, I was going to say young founders, but not all founders are young, but the companies can be young. You get to do what you've got to do to make sure that the business lives another day. Because the rate of failure of startups is whichever domain, right? It could be in the tech space, it could be brick and mortar, F&B, whatever it is. The rate of failure of startups is very, very high. And that is probably a small exception to what I said earlier. You got to make sure your business gets to live another day, because it doesn't serve anyone if your business folds. And so do what it takes to be able to get to that space where there's 3 months of cash in the books of working capital, and you're not worrying about you're going to make it to the next month or not. The second thing is money. And it's going to sound easy to say, and maybe people would say, Fabrice, it's easy for you to speak because your financial security is kind of guaranteed. But I don't think money is a very good objective. It's never a purpose. I want to be a billionaire, like the song. That's terrible, terrible purpose. It's not a purpose, actually. It's just chasing some smoke and mirrors. You need to have something more. Yes, money is important, as we said, because it ensures that you get to live another day. But there got to be something else that fulfills you. You cannot say, oh, I'm going to work like a donkey for 3 years until I make $1 million. This is chasing some hypothetical future day. And are you really going to be miserable for 3 years until you get there? So you got to think, okay, what is it that fulfills me every day? Yes, of course, there's things that I need to do that I find enlightening or fulfilling, particularly in the early stages. You need to do a lot of stuff that is unpleasant, but you need to do it, right? Like opening bank accounts and signing the rent and whatever. But there has to be a sense that you're enjoying on purpose, you're on target, right? This is something that gives you a sense of meaning, a sense of satisfaction every day. If you're just chasing a magical island that is 3 years down the road, you're going to be very, very miserable. And I would argue you may or may not be that successful. Corporations, but they were entrepreneurs. They started small. And a lot of them never thought that the business would grow so big. It was not a relevant measure. They had an idea, they had something they wanted to build. And over time, it grew. But you cannot say, I want to be a billionaire. I don't think it's a good motivation. I think have a purpose. The term purpose is used everywhere now. How do you make every day meaningful? It's not about happiness, because happiness goes up and down a lot. I can be happy now because I'm talking to you, and then in 15 minutes I bang my foot against the door and I hurt my little toe, and I will be extremely unhappy. And so happiness is a very volatile measure. It's more a sense of fulfillment. Do I feel that I'm contributing? Does every day count? I love this expression of no zero day. I don't know if you've heard that before. At the end of the day, look back and did this day matter? It doesn't have to be grand stuff, but we're all pushing our boulder down the road. And, it doesn't matter whether I push it 3 centimeters today or 3 meters or 3 kilometers, but I need to have pushed it. And I think that sense of progress, the sense that it's about the journey, it's not about the destination. There's no destination that really matters, because you know how it is in the corporate world. You fix a destination, like we want to get sales at $100 million. Well, the day you get your sales at $100 million, you say, oh, we're going to get sales at $200 million. So there's never derive a sense of satisfaction, a lasting sense of satisfaction from achieving targets. Well done, pat on the back, good year, you made your budget. Okay, now let's reset the clock, and here's your budget for next year. I mean, this is dreadful.
That's the hamster wheel definition of hamster wheel, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's that goalpost constantly moving, right? You never actually can catch it. Yeah. But if you have the meaning, if you're chasing meaning, you don't mind doing the treasury, the hard work, the things that you have to do in business. Because you're chasing meaning, you're not chasing profit. Because it's like, if you're chasing profit and you're spending money and losing money and owing the bank money and you're trying to pay off debt, like none of that feels good. And that causes a lot of entrepreneurs to quit, right? Because that stress is too much. But if there's meaning behind your work, purpose driven, it makes such a difference in that, okay, we can get through the hard times, we can figure it out, we can do what we have to do to pay the payroll or whatnot to keep going. And I think that's such a difference in mindset and so important. And I love that you've emphasized that so much in this conversation. It's that doing work on purpose is the change maker for a successful CEO and someone who quits. That's the difference between the two. Yeah, would you agree?
I was just going to say the external environment we have no control over. What we do have control over is the internal environment. And that's the way we react to things, the way we respond, the way we interact with others, the way we treat other people in our teams. That's all internal stuff. How do we want to operate in the world? How do we want to play this game of life and business? That's what we control.
Oh, definitely. And of course, we're always trying to predict, right? We're always trying to strive for something particular, but it's so true. We have no control over so many of the external things that happen. So that takes a lot of resilience, right? To be able to accept that, to deal with that, to handle these big things that come our way. I love talking about retreats. And I think that's something that everybody should think about, and I love that you brought it down to like an hour. Like a retreat doesn't mean 3 weeks in some foreign country. It can just be an hour in your garden or at the beach, or just step away and take the notebook, not the phone. I love that message too. I really appreciate it. And I think that's something I'm definitely going to incorporate really soon, because I think I could use a step back in a retreat myself. So thank you, Fabrice. And this has been an amazing conversation. We so appreciate your time. Thank you.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Resilient Entrepreneurs. We hope you enjoyed hearing from our amazing guest and learned something new about resilience and entrepreneurship.
Remember, resilience isn't just a trait, it's a skill that can be learned and developed. And if you want to stay connected with us and hear more inspiring stories, be sure to hit that subscribe button and follow us on social media.
And if you know somebody who's a resilient entrepreneur and would be a great guest on our show, we want to hear from you. Please reach out.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Resilient Entrepreneurs.